The eye-searing flash crested over the horizon. It was the only thing Greaves remembered seeing before shielding his eyes from the blast as quickly as he could. Looking directly at it would have blinded him. The low rumble of the impact shook the ground in the distance, drowning out the frightened, desperate wails of the sirens, a warning that nobody could do anything to heed. An initial shockwave started rippling outwards from where the bomb had hit. Over in the city, windows were shattering, buildings were falling, everything was burning. Greaves turned heel and sprinted back towards the entrance, ignoring all the screams and abuse being hurled at him from the civilians blocked out by the barricades. One called him a murderer. He had to shut it out despite the guilt gnawing at him. In seconds, the shockwave from the blast would reach them, clouds of radioactive fallout sweeping over all the people still so desperately trying to break down the fences that kept them from getting inside the Ikea. Once his foot had crossed through the entrance, the automatic doors slid closed. Someone slammed down the shutters, and with a metallic thud, the cries and the chaos were left outside. The agent stared for a moment at the only exit, the only way back to a home that was now being ravaged by nuclear fire. Everyone and everything he'd ever known was gone. Yet the mission had to carry on. The migration wasn't just necessary, it was vital. After taking a moment, Greaves nodded to the rest of his squad, signaling that it was time to move out. They fell into a defensive formation around the mobile containment unit, weapons at the ready, and began to make their way deeper into the Infinite Ikea. Verkhoyansk Ska Republic in the Russian Federation. The rumor was that that's where it all had started. It made sense, after all. That was where the Foundation kept the Dead Hand, protected by the combined might of two mobile task forces that stood guarding SCP-3008, Omega-59 and Sigma-18, Nechayeva's Wolves and the Chess Masters. The Foundation never confirmed who had been responsible for launching the attack against the complex. Most fingers pointed towards the Chaos Insurgency, or GRU Division P, although no one could seem to come up with a cognate reason as to why the Russian government's own anomalous containment organization would make a play like this. Mutually assured destruction seemed to be the only explanation, and as far as excuses for ending the world go, it was a flimsy one, to say the least. Whoever those mercenaries were, or rather whoever they'd been working for, they were certainly efficient. They hadn't started with an all-out strike against the Foundation armed containment complex that housed SCP-1984. After all, facing off against both the task forces stationed there would have been quite the short-lived fight. In fact, their attack had started months earlier, in a far stealthier way than the Foundation ever could have predicted. But before we go into the terrifying way the mercenaries attacked, I have a question for you. Is something interfering with your happiness or preventing you from achieving your goals? Regardless if you have a clinical mental health issue like depression or anxiety, or if you're just a human who lives in this world who is going through a hard time, therapy can give you tools to approach your life in a very different way. And that's why I'm excited to tell you about today's sponsor, BetterHelp. BetterHelp's mission is to make therapy more affordable and more accessible, and this is an important mission because finding a therapist can be really hard, especially when you're limited to the options in your area. BetterHelp is a platform that makes finding a therapist easier because it's online, it's remote, and by filling out a few questions, BetterHelp can match you to a professional therapist in as little as a few days. It's easy to sign up and get matched with a therapist. There's a link in my description. It's betterhelp.com/SCP Explained. Clicking that link helps support this channel, but it also gets you 10% off your first month of BetterHelp, so you can connect with a therapist and see if it helps you. And because finding a therapist is a little like dating, if you don't really fit with that therapist, which is a common thing with therapy, you can easily switch to a new therapist at no additional cost without stressing about insurance, who's in your network, or anything like that. So if you're struggling, consider online therapy with BetterHelp. Click the link in the description or visit betterhelp.com/SCP Explained. Thank you again, BetterHelp, for supporting this channel. And now back to the secret mercenaries and their insane attack strategy. The powers behind this mercenary group must have figured out that part of SCP-1984, the corpse of a Russian Sergeant Marat Cherinkov, could detect and monitor radio waves, scouring broadcasts for any information relating to global military tensions and the possibility of threats to the Russian Federation, as well as any other former parts of the Soviet Union. Using this knowledge, the mercenary group had been subtly feeding SCP-1984 information via radio broadcasts that had gone undetected by the Foundation. Their on-site information control team normally kept the Dead Hand in its dormant state, by transmitting radio and TV broadcasts to imply there were still ongoing tensions between the Soviet Union and NATO that were gradually easing. SCP-1984 believing the world remained stuck in a perpetual Cold War. That is, until someone told it the truth, slipping secretive radio messages in underneath the Information Control Team's broadcasts, allowing the Dead Hand to realize the Foundation had been lying to it. When SCP-1984-01 manifested as a hazy apparition that resembled a floating human nervous system, it began decimating personnel sent in to stop it as it raced towards nearby nuclear installations. But it wasn't acting alone. The mercenary forces who had orchestrated the Dead Hand's activation, and whoever their mysterious benefactors were, had arranged for backup to arrive in the area. The same morning that SCP-1984 was primed to activate, a file was sent out to everyone working at the Foundation complex, a file that contained images of SCP-096. This led to an instant containment breach as the Shy Guy appeared at the complex and began viciously attacking the members of the two mobile task forces on site, preventing them from stopping SCP-1984-01. Mercenary forces, equipped with scramble optic technology, also engaged in a firefight with Nechaeva's wolves and the Chessmasters, while the Foundation's operatives struggled to contain both loose anomalies and attacking soldiers of fortune. During the chaos, the Dead Hand was able to reach a strategic rocket installation situated 81 kilometers northwest of the armed containment complex. There, SCP-1984 began interfacing with the base's command systems, authorizing a strike of R-36M intercontinental ballistic missiles to launch at several targets across Europe and the United States. These particular missiles each carrying a 20-megaton nuclear warhead. There was a rumor that upon seeing the first of the R-36Ms crest over the horizon, the commanding officer of Mobile Task Force Omega-59 dropped his weapon to the ground and walked directly towards SCP-096, looking the Shy Guy directly in the face. Greaves and his squad had set up camp in what appeared to be a canteen inside the Infinite Ikea. They'd each brought enough rations to survive for a few days, but the migration protocol had required them to all become familiar with Incident 3008-1 beforehand. They'd been made to study speculative maps based on journal entries from the few civilians who escaped SCP-3008. That same information had been used to chart a course through the labyrinth of showrooms, model kitchens, and flat-pack furniture towards their destination. Establishing a base camp near the canteen had been Graves' idea. They knew that the food restocked each time SCP-3008's crude day and night cycle passed, so they'd have plenty to feed the squad with before they set off once the lights came back on. A few meters away, Greaves spotted an SCP-3008-02 instance lumbering around, lazily shuffling its feet at the tips of its elongated legs, dragging its long arms like it was bored. It did not notice the camp, instead murmuring, "The store is now closed. Please exit the building," to nobody but itself. One of the squad was having trouble sleeping. Patterson had been sobbing quietly, trying to keep himself together. Greaves quietly watched as the man looked at a photo of his family, a husband and 2 kids. It was heartbreaking. They'd been on the other side, outside, left behind with the rest of the world. They all knew that was the plan, of course, and there had been a way to get back everyone they lost once they made it to where they were going. The Foundation had promised them a second chance at life. Even though the world had just been destroyed by nuclear war, they'd be loyal pioneers helping humanity survive. They just had to make it through the Infinite Ikea alive, and then this whole nightmare would end. Once it seemed like the Dead Hand couldn't be stopped and that it would imminently trigger a nuclear strike, the Foundation had to act not only radically, but fast. They knew the risk for potential fallout, both geopolitically and radioactively, was massive. Multiple ICBM launches coming out of Russia targeting the United States and Europe was hardly going to go without retaliation. Desperate times called for desperate measures, and in order to continue its mission of containing anomalies, the Foundation found its hand being forced. Where they had once operated under a veil of secrecy that prevented the public from having any knowledge about their operations, the SCPs they had in containment, even the existence of anomalies as a whole, the Foundation now had one option remaining: going public. The decision came as a shock to many personnel, all gathered around the TVs in various Foundation site break rooms, watching Dr. Gears issuing a public statement to the entire world. He was telling them everything that the Foundation had been working in secret to contain anomalous entities, creatures, people, places, and objects, while the rest of humanity lived blissfully unaware of the dangers they were in. Before outrage, confusion, and terror had a chance to set in, Gears issued a warning to the world about the impending nuclear strikes, but assured the public that the Foundation had a plan in place to save everyone. Most of the personnel watching had no clue what he was talking about. Of course, clearance levels meant there was still plenty of secrecy within the Foundation itself. To many, it came as no surprise there was some contingency in place to circumvent a potential nuclear war, and personnel readied themselves for directives from their superiors. However, soon came the message from the top to disregard what Dr. Gears had told the world, that instead the Foundation would be downsizing as part of something referred to only as the Migration Protocol. In a short amount of time, orders were being issued to secure and seal in containment units of various anomalies, to prepare them for transportation. Meanwhile, the rest of the outside world fell into a predictable panic, terrified of the nuclear warheads set to come raining down on them, and of just having learned there were monsters on Earth with them. But seemingly still working as smooth as polished clockwork, the Foundation went into overdrive, gathering up the containment units as they were instructed, and readying them for the next phase of the plan, which they were assured would be revealed to them in due course. As it turned out, the Foundation's goal wasn't necessarily to save the world from impending doom, but to instead preserve the Foundation itself and its mission by abandoning this reality entirely. Their intention, or so they claimed, was to use SCP-3008 as a nuclear fallout shelter and ferry only Foundation personnel, as well as a few anomalies deemed vital enough, into the Infinite Ikea, where they could survive the carnage and emerge safely in another near-identical universe where the world hadn't been destroyed by warheads. It was dastardly even by the Foundation's typical questionable standards, and concern began to spread among personnel. The higher-ups at the SCP Foundation assured them that they'd be able to resume their lives in their new home universe, although those who had families raised valid arguments about how they'd seamlessly integrate into living among alternate versions of their loved ones, especially with the harrowing knowledge that their families were being left behind to burn in atomic fire. The Foundation announced its plan was to administer amnestics to their personnel and any of their alternate universe families so that once the migration through SCP-3008 had been completed, nobody would even remember what had happened. It did not take long for word to get out to the public through an anonymous leaker. Once people learned what the Foundation were planning, there was mass outrage and calls for a wider scale evacuation. Civilians kept an eye on Foundation transports, spreading word via social media that they were moving containment units, and having learned of its location, angry mobs flocked to the entrance of SCP-3008, demanding that they too be let into the Infinite Ikea and spared from the incoming nuclear warheads. Mobile task forces were deployed to create barriers and block any unauthorized access to SCP-3008, while the designated transport teams were assigned a containment unit and a route through the Infinite Ikea. One Agent Solomon Graves had been part of the closing team to be sent in, right before the first warhead made its inevitable impact. Neither Greaves nor any of his men knew what anomaly was inside the containment unit. They were trained not to ask questions, just follow the route, carry out the migration protocol, and they would make it back to their families. Another version of them, at least. Not that they'd even remember the difference afterwards. The sound of gunfire stopped them in their tracks. One of the other teams seemed to be in trouble. Patterson had been frantic, telling Greaves that they needed to go and help the others, but the transport team leader knew that doing so could jeopardize the containment unit they had been protecting. But when Patterson broke away from the group and rushed away to help the other transport team, Greaves was forced to divert everyone off course. When they rounded the corner, they were met with one of SCP-3008's display living rooms turned upside down. Furniture had been wrecked, tipped over, or smashed. Bullet holes riddled surfaces, indicating that someone had been firing wildly at something. The other team was dead. Greaves's instant assumption was that the staff, SCP-3008-02, had caught them, but it was still day inside the Ikea. Every one of the other team was present, lying there dead. Of their bodies strewn around the place, it seemed like no staff had been hit by the panicked gunfire. Greaves took a closer look at the bodies of the other transport team. Gunshots. All of them. Someone had fired on them. He ordered the rest of his squad to secure the fallen team's containment unit so they could transport it alongside theirs and carry on the migration. That was when Greaves saw it. The outer seal of the coffin-shaped unit had been opened, revealing a secondary unit inside. Through the clear glass below, he had been expecting to see an SCP, one of the vital ones the Foundation wanted to transfer to their new home. Instead, laying in suspended animation, Greaves could clearly see a man. One he recognized from the news, had even read the name in the Foundation files. He'd been a billionaire, even suspected to have connections with Marshall Carter and Dark Limited, the secret group of auctioneers who sold anomalies to only the wealthiest 1%ers in the world. And now here he was in a containment unit, protected by a transport team, being ferried safely away from a world destroyed by nuclear fire, through the Infinite Ikea, to a new universe, one where he could continue making more money than one person could ever spend in a lifetime. The Foundation wasn't using SCP-3008 to secure a second chance for humanity. It was an opportunity for the privileged few to keep on turning the same old wheel. One of the other transport teams must have found out the truth and snapped, abandoning their home, thinking they were helping the Foundation, only to learn their real job was allowing the rich and powerful to continue profiting in a new universe. Who wouldn't break? As his team looked to him for answers, orders, anything, the lights above Greaves' head shut off. Night again. The drones of SCP-3008-02 started up again in the distance. The store is now closed. Please exit the building. If only they could. Now check out SCP-1984 Dead Hand and Surviving Inside SCP-3008 The Infinite Ikea for more.